Okay, so different, I'm not Charlie. The difference from the program, I'm not Charlie. It looks like the paper's changed. Well, the paper hasn't changed, but the emphasis of, oh, thank you. It's the same paper, but I'm emphasizing a particular part of the paper, and so that's why the presentation title has changed. This is vaguely, not more, it's more than vaguely related to retirement. In fact, the work was supported now quite a while ago by the Social Security Administration through the Michigan MRRDC. The paper is very simple, or what I'm going to present is very simple. It's simply asking the question whether the nature of job demands faced by older, which older in this case means between 50 and 60 years old, workers nearing retirement age, whether the nature of those, the demands on, have changed for those workers. Doesn't all the papers so far in the last, however, 3 days have focused on innovation or diffusion? This is not innovation. This isn't diffusion. Does it relate to Zvi's work at all? Well, I would claim that it does in some ways, at least. In particular, some of Zvi's work, not the stuff that people have talked about so far in this conference, but also talks about how technological innovation affected the nature of people's work or the demand for different kinds of skills. There's his early paper on the capital skill complementarity, which I think of as in the spirit. There was more recent work that he did with me and another one of his students, Ellie Berman, looking at the effect of technical innovation or computers on the demand, in our case, for production versus non-production labor. So it's a kind of a contribution to the skill-biased technological change. I also think that relates in another way to some of his work on why do we have increasing educational attainment in the workforce, but you don't see declines in the returns to a college education, which he related to technology as well, which relates to the skill-biased technological change through, you can see that train through Larry and Kevin's work early on and my work with George Johnson and then this work. So it relates. There's another connection which isn't on the slide, I think, too, which is an attention to data, which people have been talking about here, and that is just kind of questioning the validity of data, measurement error. That also is something that certainly Zvi's work inspired some of my own, and we'll talk a little bit about the potential validity of this data. Okay. I think that at least amongst some people, including some people who were political appointees in the Social Security Administration, know the answer to this question. And I think there's among a lot of people, there's a kind of a strong presumption that technical innovations should have made work physically easier, and that should be true amongst older workers as well. Why is that relevant for the Social Security Administration who funded this work? Is because if the jobs are easier, maybe we can work longer. So that might suggest changes in normal retirement age or things like that. So that is how this work is connected to retirement. I got into this project partly because I guess I'm a contrarian, and that is, if everybody believes X, I'm going to say maybe that it's not true, or at least let's check it out and see whether it's true. The data we use is coming from the Health and Retirement Study, which is a study, I mean, if you were in some audiences, everybody would know what that was and know the file structure. I'm not going to assume everybody here knows what that is. It's a study that was started at Michigan with the help of NIA funding and is following people starting in the initial survey in 1992, people who were 51 to 61 at the time. And then since that time, there's been refresher cohorts every 6 years, so that they basically you get a structure that looks like this, kind of every 6 years. You get a new group of people, and among other things, you can follow people over time, which is what people have done a lot with this survey. But you can also, what I'm going to focus in is, you can also find kind of cohorts of individuals who, at least if the Survey Research Center has done their job right, should be representative of the U.S. population in this age group. There are 51 to 56-year-olds in 92, 98, 2004, 2010, and 2016. This is, in some ways, very old-style research, meaning we're using surveys. We're not using kind of administrative data or other big data. The data set that we're talking about, cohorts of men, maybe 1,000, a little over 1,000 per cohort, women comparable size or maybe a little larger, and so small relative to the kinds of data that people have been talking about today. Anyway, but both Charlie than I, but both of us have in some ways been involved in the collection, so I guess you can blame us in some part for all the errors. Okay, so the job questions we're going to ask were asked the first time a person gets interviewed, and then if they change jobs, they get asked as well. Sometimes they get asked it anyway. It's kind of a complicated rotation pattern. What I'm going to emphasize is the new cohorts, so that this is all these people who were working at the time. They were asked these questions relevant for their primary job. They were asked, this is the kind of question this was the question they were asked. But my job requires, is this true all or almost all the time, most of the time, some of the time, or none or almost none of the time? And then lots of physical effort, lifting heavy loads, stooping, kneeling, good eyesight, intense concentration, skill in dealing with other people, and working with computers. This last question was not asked every year, so we're going to kind of deal with that differently. There's a whole list of these questions. What the work I'm going to, there's been the last two questions, which I think requires them to do things, more difficult things than it used to, or involves lots of stress. The couple of things I want to note about this data. One is, obviously, itself, people are reporting on the nature of their job. That, relative to alternatives, one of which I'll talk a little bit about later, is it has the advantage, it's the job the person is working at. So, the disadvantage is that we can be suspicious of these self-reports. And there's a long literature in economics, of which I have contributed a little bit to, being somewhat suspicious of these kinds of reports. There's also literature that says, well, you're asking about them exactly what they are themselves experiencing, so you should pay attention to the person who's experiencing it. So there is this tension. Both of the things can be true. Anyway, the weakness is their self-reported data. The alternative that people have used often is data that is called, or used to be called, the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. That morphed into a different data set called what's now ONET, which involves experts evaluating how difficult jobs are based on an occupation. For example, nurse would be an occupation. And then they rate how much physical effort being a nurse requires, how much, and on, and those kinds of things. The obvious problem with this, well, there are two. One is not every nurse does the same kind of thing. I'm picking on nurses because I actually looked at the data for nurses, and it is accurate about nurses, but it's accurate about some mythical average nurse, And the kind of the home visiting nurse faces very different demands than a critical care nurse. And the critical care nurse has, has all the requirements that a police officer and a variety of other people have. It's a very difficult job and not really comparable to the visiting nurse. So one is there's just heterogeneity about the job that's not captured by the ONET. So, and then the related issue is they're talking about jobs for that a random sample of people in the workforce have, not people who are in their 50s. So they may miss if jobs get easier as people get older. That kind of thing will get missed by ONET. Okay, so one issue is that these are self-reported data. The other issue is HRS asks these things on a scale. So how do you deal with scales? There's a number of issues, concerns about whether the scale that one person uses when I'm rating my job is comparable to the scale somebody else uses. And there's also just how do you process, this is kind of a categorical variable, how do you deal with a categorical variable? What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about results based on treating the categorical variable as an indicator, as kind of indicator of a continuous underlying normal variable, z-scoring the data. The results I'm going to present, early versions of this, we treated the data differently. Our results are basically robust to how we treat the data. This will give you kind of a picture for one of the questions that was asked about was how much physical effort does the job require? And if you look at it, you'll see, I think, there's some face validity to the responses people give. So, for example, if you look on the right, you see we're dividing it up between men with no more than a high school education versus men with more than a high school education, women with less than no more than a high school education, women with more than a high school education. Just look at the first two columns for the men, and you'll see that basically the ones with no more than a high school education are much more likely to say that they frequently are involved in a lot of physical effort, much more so than the college graduates. If the data didn't show that, we'd say something really wrong with the data. So it has some face validity. So as I said before, our first approach was to z-score this data, and then all these job, we expect these job characteristics to be correlated. And indeed they are. This is a simple correlation matrix of our 9 job demand variables. With this, we did one more thing. We kind of try to reduce the amount of information here by doing a factor analysis. You can see here that, for example, the first 3 job characteristics are fairly highly correlated. We did a factor analysis creating 3 orthogonal factors. Again, you can question the validity of factor analysis. If we did this item by item, we get results that are similar to the ones that I will present. Doing it this way, we ended up with 3 factors, one of which is kind of I'll talk about as the physical demandingness of jobs. The second one, which is I don't have a good label for, and the third one is kind of it's becoming harder and more stressful. Most of, I think, the interesting results, at least from my point of view, are the first 3, the physical demandingness of the job, and that's what I'll emphasize. If we then look across time, so now we're talking about cohorts 92, 98, and so on. This plots kind of the mean of this kind of composite variable, physical demandingness of jobs over this span, and we see a dip and then a rise for men, kind of a wobble for women, and then nothing much. This is just raw everybody in the sample. If we then stratify it by a kind of high school, men with high school or less, 51 to 56 in each of these groups, versus more than high school, 51 to 56. As you would guess, the these things are error bars. You see, once you stratify by educational attainment, you see what looks like an upward trend in terms of the physical demandingness of jobs. So if anything, this data is saying the jobs are getting more difficult, not less difficult. You can see there's a very huge difference between those with no more than a high school versus those with more than a high school education. And that's the pattern we see for men. If we look for women, we see an upward pattern. Both the upward for men, that pattern is statistically significant. This pattern is statistically significant for women. For those with more than a high school education, there's no clear pattern for these scores. That if we look at some of the other characteristics, we find this pattern for the factor that I don't have a good label for, some evidence of upward trend in terms of whether the job requires more concentration, better eyesight, people skills. I'm going to skip through these then, and for the involving stress, no clear pattern. So what I want to kind of, and the computer, no surprise, increased use of computers. What I want to emphasize now is mostly the physically demandingness of jobs, partly because that was the surprising results. Also, in results that I'm not going to specifically report on, I don't have slides for today, but it's that when we put these measures into simple kind of, you could say, descriptive retirement models, the physical demandingness of jobs is predictive of the kind of application for disability benefits. It doesn't predict non-disability related retirements. There's no proof that that's a causal relationship, but it's plausible. You would think that if you were in more difficult demanding jobs, especially amongst older workers where the disability, when they're screening individuals who are above the age of 55, the requirement is, can you continue to do the work you were already doing? Under the age of 55, officially it's supposed to be any job in the national economy, but after 55, it's can you do the job you were currently holding or were holding? So it seems the notion that being physically demanding is kind of relevant for the application for disability benefits or even general retirement benefits seems quite plausible, and in those simple models, it is predictive of the application for disability benefits. So, but then the issue is one interpretation of this is that the jobs are getting actually physically more demanding. The other interpretation of it was, this is just people are responding to the question differently, and this is, the people in 98 is a different group of people than in 92, 2004 different than 92, so it could be just that. Okay, given I have only 1 minute, I'll summarize. We also tried, well, I think I can. The ONET data we have here goes over a shorter period of time. There's a matching of ONET to census data, which is differently. There are different versions of ONET. So you see here 2 different ONET versions. But if you look for the men, you see at least an upward trend. And if you look, well, yeah, it's a little less clear when you stratify by educational attainment. But we certainly don't see any evidence of jobs getting physically easier over time. And and that, I guess that's a conclusion. And is it relevant for something? I think it's potentially relevant for something in terms of if we're thinking that technological innovation should have made jobs easier, at least over this span of time, it doesn't seem to have done so.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Hello. I don't have slides. So first, I got to start with a pop quiz. So here's my pop quiz. Wait, I got to put the button in. this afternoon, who is it that said men are overconfident? We had speakers today. I'm asking you about our speakers. These people are never embarrassed. So who said men are overconfident? I said it before you came. All right, then. Good, because I'm so glad you said that, Bronwyn, because that's perfect for my example.
What did she say?
Who, among our speakers, people like me, who said men are overconfident?
Yeah, but what did she say?
And she said, Bronwyn said she said it yesterday.
I said it when I was discussing the paper before Kathy arrived.
I mean, frankly, it's a pretty well-known fact, but I'm asking who said it. All right, well, you're not allowed to report for yourself, because I want to see if any of them are listening. All right. All right. All right.
The question is, how many of us also said it privately and not out loud like Josh?
That's a good point. All right, now, a point I would like to make, and that is, I've been coming to these conferences for a long time, and so there are person effects for who is funny and who is not. And so I have some person effects for this afternoon for people who, if they start discussing a paper and they are not funny, I'm gravely disappointed. Now, I hope this doesn't embarrass anyone, but because it's actually several people. Thinking back about papers being discussed today, can you think of anyone that comes to mind? What discussant would be funny or was funny for some few minutes of his presentation? Okay, and anyone else? Kevin, okay, that's good. Anyone else? Ian, that's good. Though, man, I was sure you were going to disappoint me after the dry first sentences. Okay, so does that mean men are always funnier?
No, because most of the discussions were men.
Oh, that's another point. All right, so now let me give you a model, so to speak, and that is, think about how we view our careers. Our careers go from time 0 to time t. Some of us are at time 0, not many in this room. Some of us are at time t, i.e. end of career. And at time 0 and time t, obviously you have very different sort of wishes for yourself, things that guide what you want to do. And at time 0, you're worried about your reputation, and you're investing very heavily. And at time t is, what the hell, right? And so, because you're done. And so at time t, you have two influences. It is, I don't really need to worry about my reputation. It becomes, what does it become in France? Yes, okay.
He doesn't care.
Okay, so in France, this occurs at age 35. Which I wouldn't have, yeah, exactly. I wouldn't have mentioned until I was just then prompted. But so, yes. But in principle, you're also wiser, and so, you should responsibly use that wisdom if you wish. But anyway, So now I'm getting to, you know, John and Charlie's work. And what you have here is such a tiny glimpse that, you know, so small that, you know, he didn't really have time to really explain their objectives, to be honest. You know, the slides just don't really, you know, get at it. And so here's what I think, you know, they are doing or should do. What you see here is, let's just say, they're looking at 51, you know, they're looking at people aged 51 to 61 before they reach the retirement age. And so let's say they're looking at women, you know, in that age group. And for them, over time, their stress levels are relatively fixed, and their computer use, you know, rises over time. Their heavy lifting is pretty constant, you know, so they have really nice data on these factors, and Charlie and John have worked with this data since T0. So they can figure out, no, I'm joking. They can figure out, you know, use the data well. So they do have a partial paper, you know, that does connect the retirement decision, or actually, as John said, the decision to take up workman's comp to this. And so, you know, I wish they would just junk the part of the paper, get rid of ONET. You know, we didn't even get to that, to be honest. And just use that. And workman's comp has increased so dramatically as a part of the, you know, U.S. budget. People are studying it like mad. But I think, I don't know, maybe, I don't follow this literature. I think maybe you could, in fact, use some of this data and write a short paper. You know, you gave me part of a long paper, but write a just short paper and find a graduate student who is age times 0. So they have the energy and the recent, you know, econometric skills to write, just complete that short paper, where you have, you know, the physical demands and, you know, you have the literature on, I mean, the variables on physical demands and these things, so that you can really connect those, because you do have really interesting potential results here. And I think it'd be just really cool to do. And then one thing, in conclusion on my comments here, I think you should definitely focus on, you know, the stooping variable, which for women, because, you know, stooping, I don't know what stooping is. I think it's, what is stooping? Something like this? Yeah, that kind of stooping. Because I don't think anyone should be stooping who's age 50 to 60 under any circumstances, because as far as I can see, since I'm sort of in that age range, when I use my iPhone, I get these videos coming at me. And what the videos are is they're trying to train me to get all my exercise sitting in a chair and going. So I think that's better than stooping. So you can just eliminate stooping and finish the paper, really, just short paper, short, based on workman's comp, because I think you have the potential, you know, to complete it in that way. And to just leave things, I mean, you showed just a part of the paper today, so I would just, you know, do a segment of the paper. Anyway, but, you know, it's very thoughtful. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. John.
When the paper, not the first two co-authors, but the paper is at T0. So that's one part. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm not describing what it appears to be, which may be true, but I'm appealing to what I'm reporting on what it is. So that's number one. Number two, if I take, I took the comment by the kind of deputy commissioner of Social Security seriously, which I think I should have in some sense, is that you can worry about are people using the same scales. And and that's kind of I take the measurement issues of this data seriously, and the fact that it's self-reported in this particular case. So it's correlated measurement error. Here the measurement error might be, or the scaling is changing over cohorts. And that I think is a real problem. So I would, what we did in kind of between the early version of this paper and when we submitted to the conference was waiting to get the ONAT data. So, well, this doesn't mean there was any value in that, but I think there was in the sense that a completely different source of information on the same problem. We're not getting exactly the same answer. The questions on in the ONAT or the scaling on the ONAT isn't exactly the same. So I think there is that kind of value in the ONAT to some extent validating the self-reports. So I disagree with you on that point. I thought there was some other point here, but sort of, the paper also was originally motivated by just quite a while ago when we got the funding from Social Security on not workers' comp, but on disability insurance, which there's also work on workers' comp. It's two different things. Workers' comp's people who, very different programs, but that compensates people who have been injured on the job in some ways. Disability insurance is people who have health limitations that limits their capacity to work. Disability insurance is kind of a very significant federal program. You could call it Social Security early retirement, is sometimes how people refer to it. There was a dramatic increase in the number of people on receiving disability insurance benefits. That was one of the rationales we gave for doing this work. In fact, since recently, I don't know, very recently, but relatively recently, there has been a decline in the number of people awarded disability insurance benefits. I think people have figured out why that's true, and it has nothing to do with job characteristics. It has to do with with the screening involved in the disability program. So that, while in the paper, not the presentation, but the paper, there was some attention to a rudimentary model to say, yes, in fact, these measures matter for, I expect them to matter for retirement as well as the application for disability. In the small samples we have, they just matter for disability. So, but that was the original motivation, but because of the changing environment, that seemed like just where job conditions changing was more central to what we were interested in.
Shall we bring in more?
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
sure.
Thank you.